Hi, Bazola. Are we good to go? When are you ready for us to go?
Good morning. I would like to call to order this public hearing of the Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety. It is 9:36 a.m. on Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. And we are conducting this roundtable virtually and streaming on the DC Council's website and YouTube at CM Brooke Pinto. I am Councilmember Brooke Pinto, representing Ward 2 and the chairwoman of this committee. The Committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety has oversight responsibilities for matters affecting the district courts, criminal law and procedure and justice, public safety, including policing, violence prevention and intervention, and civilian police oversight. Access to justice, including victim services and justice grants, fire and emergency medical services, and the district's 911 and 311 services. Forensic science, fatality review and medical examinations, homeland security and emergency response, adult and youth corrections, family law, probate and estates, child support, and women's and gender policy. Today, the committee is meeting to conduct its first performance oversight hearing for the agencies under its purview. We will hear from the Department of Forensic Sciences and the Science Advisory Board. The Department of Forensic Sciences was established 10 years ago in the Department of Forensic Sciences Act of 2011. The department's mission is to provide high quality, timely, accurate, unbiased, transparent, and reliable forensic sciences to district and other law enforcement and investigative agencies with the overarching goal of enhancing public safety. The department works to accomplish this mission through its three core divisions. First, the Forensic Science Laboratory, which undertakes independent scientific examinations and analysis on behalf of district government and federal agencies that have submitted physical evidence to the agency. This evidence may include fingerprints, firearms, ammunition, blood, and tissue samples. The Public Health Laboratory, which undertakes testing of biological and chemical samples that relate to public health and safety, including naturally occurring or man-made infectious agents, chemical agents, and environmental specimens that may be responsible for human illness or death. And third, the Crime Scene Sciences Division, which undertakes the collection, analysis, processing, and preservation of evidence found at or associated with a crime scene, as well as intake, stewardship, and transfer of such evidence to our public safety agencies. Of particular note for today's hearing, in the spring of 2021, the accreditation for several of the Department of Forensic Sciences key forensic science units was withdrawn by the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, their national accreditation board, based on findings of agency deficiencies in the handling of analysis of certain evidence. This action was taken by the board following the publicization of an audit by the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia and the Attorney General, which found extensive deficiencies in department process and protocols, including concealment of information, misrepresentations, and other violations of accreditation requirements. Due to this loss of accreditation, the department's divisions are unable to provide forensic science services to stakeholder agencies directly affecting access, timing, and costs to the district for receipt of these services. In December of 2021, the executive released the SNA International DFS Laboratory Assessment Report, which provided nearly 4 dozen recommendations to set the agency on a path towards reaccreditation. To date, many of these recommendations have been started or completed. Finally, in December of 2022, the Council passed legislation making several reforms to the agency, focused on enhancing the department's independence and strengthening department oversight by the Council and Science Advisory Board. That legislation is not yet effective as it is not yet funded. Today, I intend to discuss with Director Crispino the agency's ongoing efforts to seek accreditation, including his plans for implementation of the legislation passed by the Council, once funded, and other work that the agency is doing to address the deficiencies first identified nearly 2 years ago. Today, we will also hear from the Science Advisory Board. The Science Advisory Board is responsible for direct oversight and review of scientific practices and protocols utilized by the Department of Forensic Sciences, including comparing those practices to best practices in other model jurisdictions. The board is composed of 9 members with a range of scientific expertise, including 4 members with direct expertise in the forensic sciences, and the remainder with experience more broadly in scientific research and methodology. The Science Advisory Board's oversight is key to ensuring the department's practices are transparent, unbiased, and adhere to best practices. And the board will play a critical role in implementation of the reforms in the 2022 legislation, and is otherwise necessitated by the report findings. It is my understanding that due to quorum issues, the board has not been able to meet since October. I'm eager to hear about the board's plans for oversight during this upcoming year, now that the vacancies causing these quorum issues have been filled. So for today's roundtable, we will follow the committee's normal practice and hear from public witnesses first, followed by our government witnesses. Public witnesses will have 3 minutes to present their testimony. All right, so our only public witness for today is Donatarius Smith. Whenever you are ready, if you could turn your sound and video on, you have 3 minutes.
Hey guys. So listen, my name is Donatarius Smith. I'm one of the top paranormal investigators in the United States of America. And listen, we're here with the forensic department. We're here with the science department, but we're not handling the serious issue in Washington, D.C. We have a ghost problem. We have the souls, the lost souls of some of the worst human beings to ever walk this planet of the earth. And they are stuck. They are stuck in Washington, D.C., haunting the minds and hearts and souls of children. And the problem is most of these ghosts died before they are able to transition their sex. So there's a lack of transgender ghosts. Now, DC, being one of the most thought-forward cities in the world, we need to either kill these ghosts or we need to make a way where we can turn these ghosts transgender, because my daughter is a ghost. My daughter's a ghost. And I communicate with my daughter. And she says at the playground that there's no other trans ghosts around. So unless DC and Mario Burrow wants to freaking learn something about what's going on in the world, about paranormal investigations, sorry, it's medicinal. You will never live free from the harassment.
Mr. Smith, I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you to
What are you
respect
asking me?
the rules of the committee and
Oh, do ghosts follow rules? Do ghosts follow rules? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm yelling. I'm being haunted by the living dead. And I'm here trying to talk to you guys. I can't sleep at night. My daughter is visiting me every night in my dreams. And all I can do is enough fentanyl and enough crystal meth to keep me smoothed out during the day. But unfortunately, you guys don't want to be gender inclusivity when it comes to the afterlife. Well, I'm sorry. We don't just have one life. I don't just have one life. If you don't go to heaven, if you don't go to hell, you get stuck in this earth realm. And guess what? All you can do is haunt people all day. And you have to watch your ex-wife or their new boyfriend doing disgusting stuff. Is that what you want? I don't think so. So we need to reallocate the funds so that we can use a forensic department to actually find these living dead beings and exterminate them, or at least transition them and cause them enough gender dysphoria so that they end up killing themselves, because ghost suicide is real. That's the only way a ghost can die. That's the only way a ghost can die.
Thank you very much for your testimony. That's all the time we have today. Okay, so we will now call our government witnesses, Jean Jordan of the Science Advisory Board and Interim Director Anthony Crispino of the Department of Forensic Sciences. It is the tradition of this committee to swear in all government witnesses who appear before it. If you can raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you are about to provide before the Council of the District of Columbia and this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Ms. Jordan, you're on mute.
Sorry, I do.
Thank you both. All right, so we can start with you, Ms. Jordan. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with some logistical questions about your meetings. It's my understanding that the board has not been able to meet since October due to a high number of vacancies that prevented the board from meeting a quorum. It's also my understanding that the board only met twice in fiscal year 2022. What was the cause of the board meeting so infrequently during fiscal year 2022?
You are right about lack of quorum. When we brought this to the attention of DFS, we submitted names, which were then sent forward through the process of MODA to get these people vetted to be put on the board. This took an extraordinarily long time. I kept in contact with Mr. Crispino during this entire time. It was out of his hands, it was out of my hands. It eventually made it to DC Council, where it took an extraordinarily long time for these people to be voted in. And our swearing in ceremony occurred, I believe it was January 12th of this year. So we were without a quorum, and we still do not have a full membership of 9 individuals. We are at 7 members currently, so we do have a quorum. But one of my recommendations is that we should be prioritizing keeping track of these either new appointments or reappointments so that we can keep the board fully staffed. And we have, I believe, 2 members that are currently serving whose term expires in April of 23. So we're talking just a couple of months from now. And so it's critical that this be a priority to keep the board fully staffed.
Are you aware of any plans to fill the other 2 vacant positions in the next few months?
No, because we have not met. And so in preparing for this meeting and reading through the legislation, I realized for the first time that it was to be a 9-member board. We've never had nine members on the board since I have been serving. So that was new to me. So I spoke with Mr. Crispino about this important point. And so we have our first upcoming meeting in less than 2 weeks. So that's one of the agenda items I've asked to be put on the agenda to discuss so that more names can be brought forth and put through this process.
Okay, that's great. And what is the date of that next anticipated meeting?
I believe it is the 16th of February, Thursday, the 16th, I believe. I don't have my calendar up right now.
And do you plan to, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I believe it's March 2nd.
Oh, we have a new date. Okay, my apologies.
March 2nd. Okay, thank you, Director. And is it your plan and expectation that there will be at least 4 meetings this year?
That is my goal, and I have shared that thought with Mr. Crispino that we need to get back on having quarterly meetings so that everyone, and I think part of it is we now need to settle on a new date and time that is convenient for all of these new members. The former date and time that we had that worked for the past members is apparently not going to work. And so we've been having difficulty finding a time and date that we can kind of settle on. And then our past sort of action was before the end of the meeting that we were currently having, we would set the date for the next meeting. And since we haven't had those meetings, we haven't been able to sort of all be either in the same room or on Zoom together at the same time to come up with that time. So that is my goal for this upcoming meeting, is to get that next meeting on the calendar.
Okay, we look forward to seeing that happen. Thank you. In the past, the board has struggled to access case and complaint records and other documents critical to its oversight of DFS. Has that improved in your understanding over the past year?
It's been untested really because of the fact that we've not had a quorum and we've not had regular meetings. And so, and many of the members who were forensic scientists have either come off of the board or left voluntarily. And so those are really the key people to have this information to be helpful. And so no, we haven't had that yet. I'm looking forward to being able to get back into that process and make the ask, because we haven't had the chance to make the ask. So the experiment hasn't occurred for me to say yes or no to.
Okay, do you feel as though board members for this upcoming meeting will have sufficient resources to meaningfully review these records? Or if not, is there any other resources or staffing that the board will need to make meaningful improvements on that work?
Well, I guess part will be knowing where. Part of it is to get an update from Mr. Crispino as to where they are in this effort of reaccreditation, so that we can then appreciate where we can be helpful. So I think we are waiting for DFS to ask for our advisory capacity for us to help in that capacity. And so many of the forensic scientists who are new to this board, and so they have no history, no institutional knowledge about what occurred. So they have no ability to really ask questions. So we are hopeful that we can work with DFS to help advise them as to how to go forward. But that's going to require a really in-depth discussion and briefing on their part so we can get up to speed.
Okay, and you anticipate that type of briefing and conversation will start at the March board meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Do you anticipate that the legislation passed by the council last fall will address the issues that have been preventing the board from engaging in proper oversight of the agency once it's funded and effective?
Yeah, yes, I was very impressed with the recommendations that were generated in this piece of legislation. And I'm very hopeful that that will take us a long way in being able to help and advise.
Okay. Can you describe the board's relationship with the stakeholder council? How often does the board meet with the stakeholder council? And are there any other methods that the council uses to communicate with the board?
I have no knowledge of that and really cannot answer that question because, yeah, I have no ability to answer that question.
Okay. And is that because you have not had a relationship with the council, or you're unaware of the board having a relationship with the council?
I do not have a relationship with the council myself. Maybe others on the board have in the past.
Okay. Okay. How is the board's relationship with Director Crispino? How often does the board engage with the director or with the director's leadership team?
Well, as you know, we have only had 2 meetings since this loss of accreditation, partly due to, well, completely due to quorum issues. So we've not had the ability to really work closely with him, other than the 2 meetings that we've had. And so I believe that there is a much more open feeling about requests that would be made or could be made, that I'm very much looking forward to with working with Mr. Crispino, as opposed to the former director.
Could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by requests that could be made or will be made?
Well, based on some of the details that came out of the SNA interviews that occurred with members of the board, one of the things that sort of came to the surface was this lack of not always getting access to documents, and when forensic experts made those requests. And so that certainly hampered the board's ability, especially those with expertise on forensic science, to advise and recommend. And so that going forward is something I hope will be honored by this new director.
Right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One critical role that the board plays is in ensuring the department is utilizing the best practices in its work. How do the board members, or are you expecting them to, stay up to date on what the best practices are for the range of forensic services provided by the department?
Well, many of them work in the field, actively work in the field, and all of them have incredible contacts around the country in terms of best practices. And so they have a wealth of ability to network, to keep up, as well as reading the scientific literature. And, you know, as we're all dedicated to using best practices. And so I think we're well poised between active expertise in the field and the networking that all of us have.
But are there kind of standardized checks and updates for protocols that you all engage in, or it's more general expertise? And it sounds like almost ad hoc research.
I'm not sure I understand. Can you just rephrase your question?
Sure. So you're talking about kind of the general expertise in the field that people on the board have, or networking or scientific research, but is there any kind of standardized protocols for reviewing the best practices and ensuring that DC is utilizing some of those best practices?
There are definitely guidelines, and everyone, when I say expertise, it's not a general expertise. Everyone has very focused expertise. Some are in latent fingerprints, others are in ballistics. They're all over the board. And so it's a very rich board with diverse specific expertise. There are guidelines that are published that we are aware of and that are discussed during our quarterly meetings back in the day. Yes, so.
Okay, thank you. Do you see the board playing a role or a larger role in the department's efforts to regain its accreditation?
That is a vital role that we need to participate in. And so I would really, one of my asks is that DFS not consider the board as adversarial, but as cooperative, and that these board members who are volunteers with incredible expertise we are all here to help. And so our goal would be to play a major role in reaccreditation of the DFS labs. Yes.
Okay. To date, has the board been provided a seat at the table as the agency is working towards adopting the necessary reforms? Is there any more that can be done to incorporate the board and its recommendations in this process?
So the huge hurdle that we just overcame was lack of quorum. And so during this incredibly critical time that DFS was facing, they were unable to ask us to meet because without a quorum, we were unable to meet. It was against the rules. And so we have been very frustrated having to sit on our hands and not be of help. And so now that within the last 2 weeks of having a quorum, we are now very eager to help in that capacity.
Okay, thank you. One recommendation in the 2021 SNA International Report was to split the SAB into 2 boards, one overseeing the department's forensic sciences work and the other overseeing the department's public health work. What are your thoughts on this proposal? How does the board currently divide its time between the different forensic sciences services provided by the department? Is it equal meeting or case review given to overseeing the agency's public health and evidence and crime scene analysis work?
Yes, when we attend a meeting, either in person or virtual, we have the opportunity to get updates from all of the various divisions, both on the forensic science side as well as the public health lab side. And although we have expertise in certain areas, much of the sort of quality assurance components are similar, regardless of whether you're doing lab work in forensics versus public health. And so I think it's enriching to the discussion and dialogue when you have cross-fertilization with members that have expertise in the that are represented on both sides.
Okay. Several units within DFS are disciplines not regulated by ANSI, so they were not part of the accreditation review process. For example, the crime scene services, crime scene sciences, and central evidence units. SNA recommended that the district engage in a separate immediate review of case reports for several of these units. To your knowledge, has any such review been undertaken for these units, and does the board support a review?
I have no knowledge of that, so I can't answer the question. I have no knowledge.
Okay. Do you anticipate this is something that the board may look at when you have your next upcoming meeting?
I have not seen the agenda for our first meeting, so I do not know if that is on the agenda.
Okay. One of the other pieces of SNA's international report was a recommendation to stand up an ombudsman within the department to assist DFS with resolution of customer complaints and assist in resolution of intra-agency staff conflicts, undertake periodic audits of laboratory work, and serve as a resource to the board. Do you believe there is a meaningful value in bringing on an ombudsman, or a value that outweighs the financial costs and other efforts to stand up this position?
I think having a neutral party within the organization has value.
Okay, and you think that a buds person should be housed at DFS or a staffer on the board?
So you're asking whether they should be housed within DSF or be someone on the SAB?
Yes.
Is that your question? Well, to be more neutral, removing it from DFS and having it external to that would, I think, relieve pressures on that person to be neutral. And that would sort of protect that person to feel safer about being neutral. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jordan. I see we've been joined by my Ward 6 colleague, Charles Allen. Councilmember Allen, if you have any opening statement, we can tack that on to a round. So if we can start the clock, perhaps we can give you an 8-minute round.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good to see everyone. Director Crispino, good to see you as always. So I probably just have like one round of questions, Madam Chair, but I'll try to work my way through them fairly quickly. So again, Interim Director Crispino, it's great to see you again. Appreciate your work as well as the testimony. One of the big goals, obviously, that DFS has continued to work on is moving toward reaccreditation. It's obviously not a silver bullet for every problem that exists, but we also know that it is an incredibly important target that we've got to meet to help get DFS back to where we need it to be. In our hearing last year, the kind of rough timeline to apply for reaccreditation was spring 2023 was kind of a rough timeline. And I think I remember the deputy mayor at the time was trying to be a little more ambitious and said fall 2022, but I think spring 2023 was a more realistic timeframe. Could you give us an updated timeline as to when you think the agency will be applying for and then achieve reaccreditation?
Sure. We are still aiming for late spring. It may go a little bit further than that. We are working through the steps that the quality assurance consultant has put in place in order to lay the foundation for the application. That's proceeding on track. So fingers crossed, absent any unforeseen circumstances, we hope to be able to be in a point to put the application forward in late spring, early summer.
Okay. And then the timeline for the reaccreditation process itself is not a quick process. Just kind of refresher for folks. Can you talk about how long that process would probably take?
Sure. Based on our understanding, once the agency is at a point where we feel that everything, all of the reviews that are required to ensure that we meet all of the provisions of accreditation. Have all those boxes have been checked, the application is submitted. At that point, there's an initial questionnaire that has to be completed. ANAB would review it. I believe that's about a 30-day process. And then at that point, and where the timeline gets a little bit more complicated to forecast, ANAB has to put together an assessment team, which is comprised of experts that have taken certain trainings, but they're pulled from laboratories across the country, and they come into our facility, and then they would review all of our documents, our procedures, our mock casework, conduct interviews, anything that they need to look at in order to certify that we do meet the provisions. The issue is pulling that team together, and it's our understanding that the backlog in scheduling assessments, site assessments, is assembling the team and actually making sure that all of the members on the team's schedules link up. That can take several months, we're being told at this point, because unfortunately, we are not the only lab that's coming up for reaccreditation. Some labs are just up at that point where their certificate is expiring and they need to recertify. So we're in the queue. We're hopeful that given our circumstances, we might get priority, but that's not a guarantee.
I appreciate that. I just want to make sure as we all think about this, and also for the public, I mean, I think if the application is going in early summer, a best case scenario would be the beginning of 2024.
Realistically, yes.
6-month process. And so I just want to make sure we're there. Switching gears a little bit. So as a result of the loss of the accreditation, the agency obviously had to outsource a lot of the evidence to outside labs across the country for analysis. Specifically want to ask about outsourcing on CODIS entries. So this is applying to our DNA. At the agency's performance oversight hearing last year, we heard the agency was contracting with state labs. I believe it was Connecticut and Wyoming to help get CODIS entries uploaded. In the pre-hearing question responses, I think there were 650 plus outstanding CODIS entries that needed to be uploaded. That is I would call that a significant backlog. What's the ability here to add additional lab space? And I think it's also important for us to understand this has an impact on our overall public safety system by not being able to process these and get these uploaded into CODIS.
Yeah, right. So it's not so much the lab capacity, it's the ability to make the CODIS entries. And since we had our last hearing where we talked about this, at that time, I think DFS had reached out to somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple dozen municipalities and states that met the requirements to make the entries on our behalf. And Connecticut and Wyoming, as you've indicated, were the two that were able to offer assistance. Since that time, I believe we have reached out to additional laboratories. I think in our responses, it's closer now. We reached out to another 24 jurisdictions, and unfortunately, Connecticut and Wyoming still are the only labs that have been able to render assistance in that regard. Yes, admittedly, because they're processing their own casework and uploading it into CODIS, it has created a backlog, and we will continue to see if anybody else can assist.
Okay. Do we have any indication that Connecticut and Wyoming would have to end their relationship with us?
I haven't received any information to that regard, or to that extent, sorry. Okay,
all right. I mean, obviously the concern is, we leave kind of the hits on the table, and from the impacts on sexual assault victims and our overall public safety system, it's concerning. I know you share that concern. I just think we want to make sure that we are doing everything possible to increase the ability to get those uploaded. On a different front, towards the end of last calendar year, the agency proactively disclosed that a handful of analysts in the latent fingerprint unit had not been successful in their proficiency exams. I do want to note and thank you for proactively releasing that information. I think while that's not information you want to receive, it is part of the rebuilding of the trust to be proactive in that. And so I want to make sure I give you credit for that, because it goes a good way to helping reestablish that trust and credibility. There's certainly a hurdle though. So in your goals of helping get the agency's operations running again, how has that impacted the goals for reaccreditation with the findings from the latent fingerprint unit?
I don't believe it changes the overarching strategy for seeking reaccreditation. As we've discussed in the past, the plan was always to, and this was based on the findings in the SNA report, the plan was always to put forth biology, and which is the DNA unit, DNA and chemistry first, given the relatively minor amount of findings that were made for each of those units. And then we had planned, and we still plan to proffer latent fingerprints as the third unit to go up for reaccreditation. Given that latent fingerprints is a comparative science as opposed to DNA and chemistry, where you're relying on instruments, we are relying more on instruments. We knew that it was going to take longer. Honestly, we had an expectation, like you said, the information, while it's not pretty, we kind of suspected that it may be along those lines. And as a result, while the assessment was occurring, our deputy chief science officer and the unit manager were working with the consultant to already strategize what the next steps were in building curriculums for each of the individuals who didn't meet the basic proficiency, so that when we felt the unit was ready, they would be ready to sit for individual certification when the unit went up for reaccreditation.
Okay, thanks. Madam Chair, I don't see a clock, so I have no idea if my time is up. I had just one final question, if that's okay, but you let me know.
Sure, no problem. Sorry, but the clock is not working. We've been putting updates in the chat.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
So, but yes, please ask your final question.
Okay, I'll just one final question, and that was just quickly in regard to the implementation on the SNA report. So obviously the council had moved forward the Restoring Trust and Credibility to Forensic Sciences Amendment Act of 2022, but there were also other recommendations that weren't necessarily required through that legislative effort, and just wanted to ask if there were any recommendations that had not yet been implemented or put into the process of implementation from the SNA recommendations thus far.
I mean, yes, there are still recommendations that have not been fully implemented. As we've discussed,
what I'm more asking is, have there any been that have not begun the process of implementation? Because I know some of the implementation is going to take a little time.
Yes, there are some that when we tried to prioritize the recommendations between big and minor, there are some that are on the lower end that have not, because of some of the obstacles that we've encountered as we're implementing the bigger recommendations. We just have not been able to get to some of the lesser ranked recommendations at this point, but we continue to work towards doing that.
Okay, thank you. And we can certainly follow up to get a readout of which ones those are. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. And thank you, Director Crespino.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Allen, joining us. Ms. Jordan, I do want to note I have no more questions for you. So if you would like to move on with your day, you are free to do so.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here today.
Take care.
You as well. All right. So Director Crespino, thank you so much for being here. And I want to talk with you a little bit more, as you were just talking with my colleague, about the agency's work in seeking reaccreditation for the affected 5 units. So can you give us a specific update on the independent contractor's work to review the casework by these units, in particular, the firearms examination unit and the latent fingerprint unit? Do we know what percentage of cases that have been reviewed and how many have been found to have substantive nonconformities?
Well, as you may be aware, the mayor issued a mayor's order last year, which actually bifurcated what the agency was going to work on and what the public safety cluster was going to work on under the purview of the deputy mayor. The look back under the mayor's order was assigned to the public safety cluster. The deputy mayor was running that committee, which was comprised, I believe, of the Public Defender Service, the Federal Defender Service, United States Attorney's Office, and Office of the Attorney General. And they were working to get a chair so that they could determine what the extent of that look back would be. The agency has been focused on the look forward, if you will, and correcting the any deficiencies that were found in the SNA report and addressing those so that we could achieve reaccreditation. So I don't have any information to provide in that regard.
Does DFS plan to review casework within any of the 5 units for issues, even those that didn't have their accreditation withdrawn?
My understanding is the way it's supposed to work under the mayor's order is that the ad hoc committee is supposed to determine what the breadth and how far back that look back is to go. And given their needs and to ensure that there was the proper administration of justice, they will determine what the scope of that look back is, and we will comply with whatever they come up with.
Okay, so those plans of review are not specifically housed within DFS?
Correct.
Okay. I was concerned to learn that a 2021 review of about 45 case reports from the latent fingerprint unit found that in 42 of these 45 cases, the prints were improperly evaluated. Not necessarily looking back, as you just talked about a different entity looking at those, but what steps have you taken within the LTU to address these particular nonconformities and provide necessary training to staff so that future nonconformities aren't as prevalent? Great
question. So the body of cases you're talking about, the agency proactively had one of our contractors review 40, I believe it was about 45 cases at random. It was a random sampling over the last year that the analysts were doing internal review work before the loss of accreditation. And what that random sampling revealed was that in some of the cases that were reviewed, as you pointed out, the analysts were overly conservative in their initial determination, which means that the finding was that there were some fingerprints that were not called of value and put forth for further examination. So based upon that, the agency then took the step of working with the chief executive's office to bring aboard a consultant, Evolve Forensics. And what Evolve Forensics has done since onboarding ran all of the analysts in the unit through a 4-week assessment process that covered all of the basic skill sets that a latent fingerprint analyst should have, and then scored each of the weeks and then cumulatively scored it. And those are the results that Councilmember Allen was referencing that the agency has subsequently disclosed. Given the results of that analysis, we've been working with the owner of the consulting company to develop tailored curriculums for each of the analysts. And the outcome of that will be that at the end of the process, each of the analysts will be able to sit for the IAI certification test, which is it's a professional association, but instead of it just relying on the blanket accreditation from ANAB, each of the individual analysts will also be individually certified by that professional association and have to meet all of the prerequisite requirements, which are actually quite extensive.
Okay, thank you. And is there a timeline by which you expect those additional trainings and accreditation certificates to happen?
We're hoping it'll be about 6 months. Again, it depends on each of the analysts being able to absorb, retain the information, and then sit for the exam. I have been clear with the unit that the expectation is that their job right now is to focus on that work. And really, we are letting the subject matter expert from the consulting firm kind of lead the process so that we don't cut any corners.
Okay, thank you. So we will follow up with that 6-month timeline shortly. So one of my concerns is about the cost to the district for outsourcing this work during this interim period. What is the total cost to the district to outsource most of the forensic science evidence analysis that's taken place over the last 2 years? I see that the agency received an enhancement of $1.5 million in the fiscal year 2023 budget for these services. In your estimation, does that accurately reflect the increase in cost?
To a degree, yes. I mean, that was sufficient to cover the costs. It's hard to predict at any given time. So for instance, like with DNA, for instance, the costs vary depending on what you're submitting and how far in the analysis you have to go. I couldn't just tell you like in any given time frame exactly how much it's going to cost. It really depends on how many samples we receive, how quickly our stakeholders need those samples back. But the enhancement that we received was adequate to cover the costs, yes.
Okay, and do you estimate that 1.5 million will be about what it costs every year to outsource this type of work?
I think it will likely go up. We are in contracts right now with the larger firms that provide these forensic services. So the prices are locked in for now. But I believe a couple of the contracts are in option years, and I have no doubt that when we reach the end of the option year, we will probably have to renegotiate prices, and that could result in increased costs for outsourcing.
And costs aside, how have you found the experience in outsourcing in terms of speed with which folks are getting back to you? Are there other jurisdictions that handle this similar volume of outsourcing?
Well, when I've talked with other colleagues from other laboratories, Houston, for example, their throughput is much higher than ours. But don't get me wrong, DC's lab, we are a large lab, and we do have a substantial amount of work that has to be outsourced. In general, the experience has been, it's been pretty good. Obviously, with any contract that you're administering, you're going to have some obstacles that need to be addressed. And we've had to go back a couple of times and talk with suppliers about expectations and their ability to meet the contractual terms. But by and large, those have been relatively minor issues, and I think we've been able to meet the need.
What's the average turnaround time for items that are outsourced to get back to versus what it used to take, the length of time it used to take under DFS?
Well, the turnaround time is generally 60 days for most things. With DNA, there are provisions within our contract which allow us to get analysis back faster at a higher cost to meet the needs of the Metropolitan Police Department to solve particularly heinous crimes. I mean, with any outsourcing, the labs that we utilize aren't all necessarily within the DMV or even on the Eastern Seaboard. So certain things do need to be transmitted, which adds to the length of time. When you're talking about turnaround times, the TATs, those are calculated from the time of receipt at the lab. So you have to account for if there's pieces of evidence that need to be shipped to the lab, that adds on to the total amount of time to get results back. When we do it in-house, literally you're taking results from one floor to another. So it substantially cuts down the turnaround times,
Okay.
which is why we're pushing so hard to get reaccreditation back.
Right. So it's accurate to say that outsourcing the testing is more expensive and more timely.
It is more timely, and yes, there probably are more costs associated with it. Operating in-house is the preference always. Bless you.
Thank you. So as I noted earlier, several of the forensic science units within DFS cover disciplines that are not regulated by ANSI and therefore are not part of this accreditation review process. And as a result, those units' compliance wasn't reviewed by ANSI or by and large by SNA International, including crime scene sciences and central units I'm sorry, I already asked you this question.
That's good.
And okay, and we talked about that a little bit for other reviews going on. So have you engaged with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Attorney General on implementation of necessary reforms?
Yes, my staff has been meeting with them regularly. There has been, with the monthly meetings, there has been a pause. The agency with the new legislation, we had to see where that was going. We had the holidays, and then we've had some internal transitions within my agency. But by and large, yes, we have been engaging with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Office of the Attorney General.
When was the last time you met with both of those agencies?
It's been, I believe, right around the holidays was the last real meeting that we had with them. Prior to that, I believe the meetings were every 2 weeks. But the United States Attorney, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, which holidays?
Christmas.
Christmas was the last time you met with Office of Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney's Office?
I believe so. I can follow up with my general counsel to get the exact date.
Okay.
But what I was going to say was that even without the formal meetings, the United States Attorney's Office has an attorney liaison who reaches out regularly on discovery issues to my Office of General Counsel to work through things such as giglio requests or unique issues with evidence. And then the functional units also, continue to work with the attorneys to ensure that their discovery needs are met.
Okay. For the 5 units that lost their accreditation and could receive their reaccreditation on different dates, as there are different levels of reforms that are needed for each one, do you have estimates on timing that each unit, when it will be ready to seek reaccreditation? And are any of those within the next several months? I'd say 6 months at the earliest. As I was telling Councilmember Allen, the 2 units that are closest are chemistry and biology. We're working through the process of ensuring that their quality control measures are up to standard. And then there is a body of casework that they have to do so that when the assessing team is on site at some point down the road, they have something to look at to ensure that both our SOPs and other procedures were applied correctly, that they ensured that we got an accurate scientific result, and that if there were any issues, our quality control measures caught those and put corrective plans in place. For those 2 units, as I previously stated, we're hopeful that we are still on track to reapply late spring, early summer. At that point, it's just waiting for A&AB to assemble an assessment team and give us a date for them to come out on site and review everything, conduct interviews, and then give us a result. With latent fingerprints, because that is a comparative science, and it really depends on the skill level of each of the analysts, it will take longer. The consultant is having to work with the unit to put together tailored curriculums to get them up to speed so that they can sit for certification and the unit can go for reaccreditation. The other 2 units, firearms, at this point, there's no plan to bring back that unit in the capacity that it was at prior to the loss of accreditation. And then the digital evidence unit doesn't reside at the Department of Forensic Sciences anymore. Why is there no plan for the firearm units?
As was pointed out in the SNA International report, the bulk of the issues that led to the loss of accreditation stemmed from the firearms unit. And at this point, we want to focus, in terms of our reaccreditation effort, we want to focus on the units that can get back up online, get us faster results, and cut down the costs. We want to put those forward first and then address some more systemic issues that were identified. We are in an arrangement with the ATF in which We continue to be able to have test fires done for CPWL cases, and they continue to, on our behalf, make entries into NIBIN of the shell casings that are coming into evidence, so that those are in the national database for comparison.
So would you say it's accurate to say that that you all have engaged in an immediate separate review of the case reports? One of the pieces that the SNA recommended was that the district have a separate immediate review of their case reports.
Those are being done by the look back committee that's under the direction of the deputy mayor for PSJ.
Okay, and is there a timeline that you expect those reviews to be complete?
I don't have any information to that effect.
Another critical finding of the SNA International report was a disconnect between the department's quality assurance team and forensic sciences unit staff, that they had little direct interaction within the agency. And the SNA also noted that quality assurance staff had minimal experience in the forensic sciences, limiting their ability to meaningfully assess work done by the various units. What have you done during your tenure as interim director to better integrate the quality assurance team into the day-to-day work of the forensic sciences unit? I see that each agency division now has a quality division, but in your understanding, has that translated to a closer working relationship?
Yes, so that's a great question. So what we've done two things, and I'll address each separately. So at the organizational level, as you just pointed out, we have taken the specialists and embedded them with the units, so that instead of just being generalists, they are actually interfacing on a regular basis with the operational units. They are going to the unit meetings. They are talking with the tech leads. They're talking with the unit managers. So they can focus just on that unit and have a complete understanding of what the unit actually does, so that if a deviation arrives, they have at least a baseline understanding. In addition, we have engaged with ANAB, and thankfully, based upon the supplemental budget request that we received in the training category, we are running a large cadre of DFS employees through the ANAB sponsored auditor training, which should help all of the employees that undergo it become trained assessors. And that allows them to meet one of the accreditation provisions, which is that the agency has to do an internal review of all operations and procedures annually. So we put that into effect, and it is starting to show. I think it's breaking down some of the us versus them mentality that was, I noticed when I first arrived. Quality was kind of viewed with suspicion as like the gotcha team, when really what they're supposed to be doing is helping the units identify deviations in procedures and ensure that corrective action plans are put in place, and that the results of those corrective plans are verified within the recommended timeframes. Now, from an overarching standpoint, what we have done, myself and the team have done, we contracted with FACT, which is a consultant out of Louisiana that is comprised of current and former forensic experts. The owner of the company was the director of crime scene for Jefferson Parish. He's well respected in the field. He sits on numerous committees, including, I believe, OSAC. And then his team includes a quality assurance manager, a DNA expert, a chemist, a Qualtrics expert, and several of the members of his team were also lab directors or are lab directors at this point. And what they have been tasked with doing is going through all of our quality assurance procedures and documents to take a look at it, to make sure that they are up to the current standards, and that any redundancies have been removed. If there are any deficiencies, those are being addressed. And they're essentially running through a checklist, just as ANAB would do, to make sure that all of our systems meet the accreditation provisions to get us ready to reapply.
Okay, thank you for that. Can you describe the agency's current protocol for identifying errors with other issues with case reports and examinations and analyses?
Well, I mean, we have SOPs in place. In each of the units, you have a technical leader, and it's the technical leader's job to, if we were under normal operating procedures and we weren't outsourcing, obviously with any results that we get back, if the technical lead reviews those results from the private laboratory and were to notice some sort of deviation or abnormality in the results, that would get flagged, and then a conversation would occur with the outsourced lab. But if we were talking about internal operations, again, it would be on the tech lead to be reviewing the casework of the analysts and the scientists and looking to make sure, based on their subject matter expertise, there weren't any abnormalities or deviations. If one was noted, for instance, in biology, the tech lead has the ability to pause the operations of the unit while they do a root cause analysis to determine what the issue was that led to the abnormality or deviation. And at that point, quality, in this case, the embedded specialist, would assist the tech lead in developing a corrective action report where the root cause analysis is done, mitigative steps are identified and then put in place. And then in the final step of the process, they loop back after whatever the prescribed period of time is to ensure that to validate that the corrective actions have worked and that the abnormality has been addressed.
Okay, and once that abnormality has been addressed, regardless of the entity that recognizes it or flags it, what is your then next step to ensure that policies or protocols are reviewed or changed to reduce the frequency of a similar abnormality?
That actually ties into what you were talking with Dr. Jordan about. I'm not, I can't speak to how things work prior to my arrival between the agency and the SAB, but my position has always been that we should be using the SAB as a resource and relying on their expertise, frankly. And the corrective action reports by law, and it's encoded in the new legislative changes as well. The SAB has a role in which they review the reports, the corrective action reports, and they give any insights on things we may have missed, our quality folks may have missed, or things that they've experienced in their laboratories that we could bring in to ensure best practices and avoid those issues in the future. And we fully intend to bring the SAB into the process more instead of just giving them results at the end of the process. We really do want their input.
Okay, and once that input is reviewed, going to be reviewed, and policies or protocols are hopefully changed, how have you, or what is your plan to then continue verifying that corrective actions are being implemented as intended, or that they're going to be effective at addressing the identified issue?
Well, so the corrective action process is a 5-step process. And the final step of that actually is you have to keep going back at periodic intervals to ensure that the results that you're receiving are expected under the mitigation plan or the corrective action plan. So you keep reviewing, and after a certain period of time, if the issue has gone away, then you've address the issues identified in the root cause analysis. If you haven't, then you have to go back again and look at your root cause analysis and conduct it again to ensure that you find what the issue truly is that's causing the problem. But you keep reviewing it, and throughout the entire process, you need to keep bodies like the SAB involved, so that, because maybe they've seen the problem before and they can offer insights to help you get to the solution quicker.
Okay. What credentials are currently required for examiners operating in any of the forensic units?
So with the biologists in the DNA unit, they are required to go through certification periodically under the SWIG-DAM, which is the overarching guidelines that are promulgated by the FBI. So they have to meet those requirements to stay current on and actually perform analysis. Latent fingerprints, The reason we're going through, I don't believe there were any in place. So the reason we are going through beyond like an initial training, they were given proficiency tests, but I don't believe that there was any agency requirement that they have actual certification. And that's why we are now implementing this process with the consultant to get them to the point where they can sit for IAI certification, which would be a requirement. There are other professional associations, like for crime scene that we could look at to see if that would be an additional measure of accountability. And we can certainly explore that.
Do you know how many or what percentage of forensic science laboratory workers have these individual certifications in their particular discipline?
I think it varies by lab. I couldn't tell you with any certainty. Some of the certifications are expensive to achieve, but given our circumstances, we need to take every step to ensure that we have oversight and accountability.
Do you have plans to increase that number or to make sure that more of the lab workers have these individual certifications?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, the test bed will be the latent fingerprints unit. 100% of the unit will be required to achieve IAI certification. That's the plan that we're working with the consultant. And then as we start to look at other units, and if there are certifications that make sense, they're not just a professional association, but they actually have like measurable standards that have to be achieved in order to be certified, then yes, that's something we will look at and determine what the appropriate level is.
Okay. And in your efforts to do that, how do you assess examiners for core competencies in their particular disciplines?
So under our SOPs, they're required to go through competency and proficiency testing. At a minimum, I believe it's an annual requirement, but in some circumstances, it may be more frequent than that. In addition, we also have our Office of General Counsel coupled with the training department, put our folks through essentially mock court training so that they actually are familiar with how a courtroom works, what to expect on the stand, how to present their findings correctly. So those are the requirements that we have.
Okay. And if somebody does not pass that assessment or test, what are the consequences?
I mean, we remediate. We continue to work on it. We continue to run them through exercises. If it was something that was truly egregious, then we would remove them from doing casework until we could either fix the problem, get them retrained, or figure out what the next steps are. I mean, at a certain point, it may become an issue that would have to be addressed by HR administratively, but we would like to retrain everybody and get them up to speed if we identify issues.
How many total staff do you have at DFS?
I believe 240-ish, I think right now is where we're at. I mean, we've reduced our vacancy rate substantially. I believe we reduced it by 15%, but we're still working on that number.
Okay. So one of the things we talked with Ms. Jordan about was the kind of expertise of the board members and the evolving best practices that folks are staying up to date with. How are you ensuring that your examiners are keeping up to date with changes in forensic science best practices or providing them with additional skills training or education?
Well, as part of the supplemental we received for training, we ensure that our folks are going to conferences held by the professional associations, the CDC. We have them attend government provided seminars. We rely upon the standards promulgated by OSAC, by NIST. We try to adhere to those because they are usually at the cutting edge of the practices. Recently, as October, we engaged with the University of West Virginia to see about how we incorporate academia and their research and development to bring on their best practices. So that in a nutshell is how we've been doing it, is through training, and attending the seminars. But also, to your point, utilizing the SAB. Prior to the loss of quorum, especially as it related to the latent fingerprints unit, as I was trying to work with my executive team to figure out next steps, I did actually utilize the expertise of one of the SAB members who is well respected in the field of fingerprints, and actually spoke with him multiple times on an individual basis to seek his input on some thoughts that I was thinking that would put greater quality checks in place down the road. So using the SAB as well is another way to ensure that we're on top of the cutting edge techniques and procedures.
Okay, thank you. So right now the agency's priority must be regaining accreditation for these 5 units. We talked about some of the challenges with outsourcing some of this as well. That said, we also must ensure that any reforms that are implemented are followed through long-term, so that we're not facing accreditation issues again in 5 or 10 years. So how are you, Director, ensuring that the issues identified within each of these units and across the agency are addressed not just now, but in a sustaining way into the future, including someday when there's a new director?
Well, I mean, it's a global approach. It's not just focusing on the actual operations of the units. As I've mentioned in previous SAB meetings, on previous council meetings, some of the first steps that I took in my tenure were ensuring that the basics were met. When I got to the agency, we essentially didn't have a functional HR unit. We hadn't had a COO in 18 months. We didn't have a chief technology officer or a chief technology officer, sorry, CTO, for an extended period of time. And without those positions filled, we were kind of a rudderless ship, and units were allowed to sort of delve down paths individually that led us astray. And so by staffing those positions, providing leadership with folks that are competent and well respected in their fields and know what they're doing, we've been able to get back on track with making sure that we have a coherent strategy moving forward with the agency's operations. How does that all fit together? And not move forward in a silo as we look at reaccreditation, because all of these systems tie together. Making sure that the workforce is supported, making sure that the folks that we're onboarding, that they meet the qualifications set out in their PDs. Are we looking at the PDs? Are the PDs sufficient? Are they outdated and need to be updated to incorporate changes in technology or procedures that you've mentioned? So that's the approach that I'm taking, is trying to do a holistic approach and not just focus on the scientific aspect of it, but everything that supports that: procurement, making sure that we have the budget, the resources we need to support the operations, repairing relationships with our federal partners that may have fallen by the wayside, or our local partners. It has to be a global approach where we're looking at everything to make sure it all knits together cohesively.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to some of the backlog issues, DFS has shared plans with the committee to not reconstitute the firearms examination unit. Rather, the agency will continue its partnership with the ATF and outsource these analyses, as we were speaking about a few minutes ago. Why have you decided to permanently outsource firearms examinations? Is this only because of the significant nonconformities found during the audit? I'm again concerned about the increased expense to outsource this work. Do we know how expensive it is, and what were some of the decision points made by you?
I mean, I'm not going on record saying that we are decided to permanently disband the unit. It's disbanded now, and for the foreseeable future, as we focus on the other units, we're not going to reconstitute that unit. Instead, we're going to, as long as we can, continue to work with our federal partners in ensuring that the services that are needed are provided to the district, and so that the charges related to guns can move forward. But I think you nailed it on the head. there were a lot of systemic issues that came out of that unit that led to the loss of accreditation that will take a significant amount of resources and time to address. Just from a fiscal and an operational standpoint, it makes more sense to my team right now to put the time and effort into getting the agencies that can come back online faster and frankly cost more to operate on an outsourcing basis than focus on that particular unit when we're getting by with what needs to be done to prosecute gun cases. But I'm not ruling out it in the future. Just right now, we're not reconstituting it. The issues were substantial.
But does the ATF do any direct analysis of comparing bullet cases?
No. So you're talking about the actual comparative work that was being done by our analysis, where you're taking a shell casing from a random scene and comparing it to what's in NIBIN already to see if it's linked to another crime or geographic location. What we're doing at this point is the test fires, which are required to establish that the firearm is functional in order to prove a CPWL. That's being done. And then shell casings, the head stamps are being photographed and put into NIBIN for so they're in a national database for comparison by other jurisdictions.
Okay. It's my understanding that DFS has officially transferred the digital evidence unit to MPD. Can you confirm if that's accurate and explain your rationale for this shift? Why would DFS transfer just this one particular unit to another agency?
Yeah, that happened. The unit was transferred from DFS to MPD. It was based on input from our stakeholders, the needs of the district. And so the positions, the operations and the funding were transferred from DFS over to MPD so that the services could continue to be provided.
I'm sorry, can you say that last sentence again?
Sure. So the unit, its operations, its vacancies, its positions, and its funding, all of that was transferred from DFS over to MPD, but that was based on the input of stakeholders and a decision on how best to get the unit operational and the services provided.
And why do you think MPD will be able to do that more effectively?
I can't speak to that. They had the ability to carry out the functions and to accept the unit, and that the decision was made and the unit was moved.
But does DFS not have the capability and the functions to carry out the unit effectively?
Well, I mean, yes, the resources were here. However, with the loss of accreditation, we were not performing, consistent with the loss of accreditation, we were not performing those services.
So I'm just trying to understand this move back, because it's my understanding that the whole reason for setting up DFS 10 years ago was because of the MPD's evidence collection services and the concerns about having an impermissible risk of bias with MPD or the appearance of bias. And so just wondering why that same risk is not now present 10 years later.
I mean, a collective decision was made between the agencies and stakeholders, and we complied with the decision that was made and the unit was moved.
So it was not just your decision?
No. The
Who else was involved in that decision?
It was a conversation between the agencies and stakeholders to include the United States Attorney's Office.
And so was there something in particular about this unit? What's to stop other units from being shifted back to MPD? Maybe it has to do with the type of operations that they're conducting. It's different from something, say, like chemistry or DNA, where you are,
conducting in-depth analysis of either biological or chemical matter. But a meeting was had between the agencies, and that was the collective decision.
Does shifting this unit to MPD get you any closer to receiving reaccreditation?
I don't think that will impact our ability to get reaccreditation. The way accreditation works, although it's an umbrella policy of accreditation for the agency, you can individually seek accreditation individually. You just expand your scope as you add more units. So it will not impact the ability to seek a reaccreditation for biology or chemistry, and then ultimately fingerprints.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm still not following kind of all of the reasons for this shift, and so we'll hopefully follow up about that. It's my understanding that the forensic biology unit has typically outsourced a good deal of its analysis to avoid case backlogs. While this does mean FBU, unlike other units, has a minimal backlog of cases, outsourcing that work comes at a much higher cost. And so my hope is that we can endeavor to bring that work back in-house, but in a manner that won't create a backlog. What is the barrier for FBU doing this work in-house and in a timely manner? Is this about staffing levels or lack of lab space or equipment?
No, I mean, so prior to the loss of accreditation, the agency had to keep labs on contract, essentially warm contracts, because under the DC code, sex assault kits need to be able to be analyzed and the results returned within a certain amount of time. And in the event that we got a surge of cases or something along those lines and needed the extra capacity to ensure that we met the statutory requirements, we kept contracts, and we will continue to keep contracts to meet that requirement. But we will definitely strive towards weaning ourselves off of the level we're at now, but I don't think there'll be a situation where we would fully jettison contracts just to ensure that we have as much capability as possible.
Okay. For other backlogs, I know that certain units, like the forensic biology unit, has faced significant backlogs in issuing case reports. I believe about 769 cases as of this month. I anticipate that the pressure created by those backlogs was at least in part responsible for the issues prompting the loss of accreditation for these units. What are your plans to ensure that once units regain accreditation, that they're able to process case reports in a timely manner while maintaining compliance with department protocols and best practices? And are there other hurdles or barriers to reducing these backlogs that we can help rectify?
So in talking with other lab directors who have undergone either suspension of accreditation, loss of accreditation, or any kind of issue that comes up in a laboratory where it resulted in a backlog, what their suggestion is that even when we internalize operations again and are reaccredited, how we would probably address this, or how we would address this, not probably, how we would address this is our analysts would begin focusing on the new cases coming in, and then we would continue to have contracts in place to work through the backlog so that it's a dual track approach until the backlog was worked down and we could jettison the contracts.
Okay. I think it's fair to say we are on the same team in hoping to regain accreditation. But I'm worried that it seems as though there's a pattern of continued kind of outsourcing of much of the work in several of the forensic units, or transferred to another agency like we just talked about with MPD. What is your kind of thinking here more broadly about some of this shift to outsourcing or shifting versus focusing on reforms within the agency and seeking reaccreditation?
Well, I mean, I think they have to go hand in hand. Statutorily, we can't conduct any work without accreditation, but crime is not stopping. The police are still investigating cases and making arrests. So as long as that's occurring, we need to continue to provide services to the district to address crime rates, and outsourcing is the only way that we can do it. But at the same time, we need to be focused, as you said. The priority has to be on getting back to reaccreditation. So while we outsource, we will continue to bring on consultants or take whatever steps are necessary to get the units to the point where they meet the provisions of accreditation and we can submit those applications.
Okay. Since accreditation was withdrawn in spring of 2021, has the department kept on full staff in the units for which accreditation was withdrawn?
To the extent possible, yes. Obviously, with the firearms unit, because that unit, the issues emanated there and they were unable to work. We worked with DCHR and that unit was disbanded. There was no work for them to do. So in order to focus the resources that were going into the unit, that unit was disbanded until a decision could be made about its future at some point. The other units, by and large, have remained fully staffed. For instance, in chemistry, because a chemist is a chemist, I don't mean to slight my folks, I love my chemists, but because the work that they're doing, analyzing drugs is analyzing drugs. And as you know, we're one of the few consolidated laboratories. So we also have the PHL. The PHL falls under a different accreditation requirement. They're under CLIA. They've been operating full bore the whole time. And one of the functions that they conduct is opioid surveillance. To assist DBH to see, what's circulating in the district. So those chemists were able to shift their focus towards assisting with the opioid surveillance. And we were able to supplement PHL with those additional resources. Biology has remained fully sourced. I mean, we have three external labs on contract to meet the demands of our stakeholders. And it actually takes a significant amount of work to get an allotment of samples out for shipment each month. You have to go through with the police and determine what's going out for testing, or with the prosecutors determine what's going out for testing, make sure that it's packaged correctly, make sure that the paper trail matches, get the shipment ready. And then on the flip side, you have to have the analysts here to receive the reports, go through the results. For instance, we still have a CODIS administrator, even though we are not able to put the results in. The CODIS administrator still reviews the results to see, like, if an external lab says, yes, you have a CODIS eligible profile, that person continues to look at that. Some of the units contain statisticians to keep reporting out the data. Try to think, crime scene, because they were not affected by the loss of accreditation. They have been going nonstop. As I sent over in our data packet, I mean, they attend over 400 autopsies a year and assist in OCME. They have processed over 600 vehicles. They've attended over 5,000 scenes. I think on average, they've been processing over 17,000 pieces of evidence. So the work hasn't stopped. We've shifted where we can to make sure that the resources that are entrusted to us by the taxpayers are being utilized as appropriately as possible. Where we've been able to cut back costs and refocus resources, we've done that. So hopefully that situation will change and we're bringing stuff back in-house and getting back to work with reaccreditation, but we're making do with what we've been provided.
Okay, thank you. Can you provide an update on the agency's work to hire a chief forensic sciences officer and reorient the forensic sciences units under that chief?
Yep, absolutely. It's a little fluid because of the pending legislation, and I don't want to undertake any steps that are going to conflict with the requirements that are in the updated code sections. However, we have been working with a recruiting firm to see if we can get applicants. I can report that we have started to get some interest in the positions, and that hopefully we will be reviewing some of the resumes that we've received shortly. The issue is that with the pending changes to the legislation, it will change the recruitment process, whereas it wouldn't be the agency itself making the recruitment process finalized in connection with DCHR, because the chief science officer position under the new legislation becomes a nominated confirmation position. that would require us to work with the mayor's office of talent and acquisition. So I don't want to overstep my bounds, but we are trying to recruit candidates to put forward for consideration.
Okay. And for other staff, it's my understanding that of the new hires brought on in fiscal year 2022, that only about 20% of them were district residents. How does the agency work to recruit local DC residents, and why do you think so few new employees at DFS are from the district?
So that's actually a great question. I'm glad you asked. We actually are partnering. We have been partnered with Howard University. We partner with other colleges. As I mentioned, in October, we went out to West Virginia. They have a fantastic forensics program and a very geographically diverse student body that come from the DMV, Virginia, Maryland, DC, the Eastern Seaboard. And by working with the universities, we're hoping that we will get folks to stay here in the district. Howard, the relationship with Howard actually has been very beneficial, and we have hired folks from that program who are district residents. We would absolutely love to expand on that. I think one of the impediments is just that it's getting folks to come to the district. It's no secret that we are an expensive jurisdiction. If you're not from the area, it might be a bit of a culture shock or a financial shock when you come here. We offer competitive salaries, but we still have to keep pace with the cost of living. And if we don't do that, I don't know how we retain the talent, but we are working to address all of that. And we are showing dividends in that regard. I have a very competent HR manager and HR team, and they've been doing a fantastic job in trying to increase the number of district residents and folks within the DMV on our workforce. And we'll continue to work with her and her team to do that.
Can you describe any efforts that you've made to address issues that have been identified with the department's culture, specifically to value examiners' performance and accuracy over their speed or number of case reviews, and to encourage an open and productive relationship between staff and agency and unit leadership? Have you seen any meaningful changes as a result of the department culture since the beginning of your tenure as director?
Yeah, I mean, changing the culture is hard and it takes a long time, especially when things have become ingrained. I mean, folks like to fall back into their comfort zones, and it's hard. Sometimes when you initiate changes, it's hard to get them to come around. But I am proud to report that one of the initiatives that we did most recently, and myself included, every single manager underwent the George Washington University's management program, in which we took classes together and did workshops in which we learned better communication skills, how to foster relationships, conflict resolution, and we'll continue to explore those avenues of improvement. In addition, the managers, I've told all the managers that they're expected to have an open door policy. We have had a suggestion box in which we have answered anonymous inquiries by employees about a whole litany of different issues. And I think the efforts are starting to pay off. Like, I'm not expecting huge changes to happen overnight, but I have had employees pull me aside and say, look, 6 months ago, you're the director. I wouldn't have dared coming up to you and talking to you, or even having this conversation that we're having now. So I think folks are starting to see that this isn't a gotcha culture. We have to collectively move the agency forward if we're going to overcome the issues that we've been presented with. So we're exploring all the avenues to ensure that there's open communication up and down the chain of command, and addressing the concerns of the work staff.
One of the things we spoke to Ms. Jordan about was the few meetings that happened with the board last year. But of those 2 meetings, was DFS present at those? And were there any feedback or recommendations from the board or the board members that you have since implemented?
Yes. So I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to give a little clarification. Because several of the board members were not eligible for reappointment, we had to recruit there, which was a nationwide search, and it took some time. In addition, several of the members were eligible for reappointment were up. And we did lose quorum. Out of an abundance of caution, we reached out to Bega to see if we could at least do informal meetings without a quorum. And the answer back was no, you can't conduct any business. So that definitely stymied our ability to meet with them and incorporate them into the changes that we've been making. But prior to the loss of that, in the meetings that we did have, because we're supposed to, I think by law, we're supposed to meet quarterly, we were adhering to that time frame. And instead of doing just me getting up there and, just forcing data down their throat, we moved more towards a round table type form where the division heads from each of my programs are present. They make a pitch and then they answer questions, any questions that the SAB members have. And I can say that the last meeting prior to the loss of quorum, we had several very spirited conversations where they gave valuable input.
Okay, thank you. And so you anticipate close interaction and work with them in the year ahead?
Absolutely. I have never taken the tact that it should be an adversarial relationship. They are a resource and I should be using every resource available to me to include them. Even if I was a subject matter expert in one area of forensic science, which I do not claim that I am, they all have their areas of expertise, and I should, we should, myself, my managers, my executives, we should all be going to them for their expertise and their input.
Thank you. So I want to ask you a couple of questions about your work with other agencies. How do you all track chain of custody for evidence and other samples as they're transferred from stakeholder agencies to DFS and on again? Is there a protocol document that you can share with this committee? And how do you track staff compliance with your protocols and policies?
So we do have procedures on chain of custody and how things come into the agency. There are two systems that are used to track evidence as it moves through the chain of custody. One is by and large used by MPD because they ultimately warehouse evidence if it's either not being tested or it's waiting to be called up for trial. And we are in the process now that I have a CTO, a very competent CTO. We are in the process of working with the manufacturer to get that software here on site as well. That software is utilized primarily by crime scene services because they're the first touch on the evidence when they're at the scene with the detectives, with the police officers. The second piece of software that we use and all labs use is LIMS, which is a laboratory inventory management system. And that system creates a barcode for each piece of evidence that comes through the doors and then goes to each of the different units for testing. And as it's moving between the units and then back to MPD, the barcode is scanned and it keeps a electronic chain of custody, which can then be produced to the prosecutors.
Okay, and does the department track any trends or other patterns within its data to see if there are any irregularities with that chain of custody?
I mean, we're always analyzing the statistics, like what's coming through, and quality is involved in that process as well to make sure that the chain of custody is being maintained. So we have departmental manuals in conjunction with the two systems, electronic systems I mentioned, that allow us to see if there are any issues.
Are there any public-facing data made available?
Of what type?
Around policies for tracking chain of custody.
Oh, our policies are up on the webpage, and we are in the process of making sure that they are up to date. Because I know at one point PDS had pointed out that several of our policies that are on the forward-facing website hadn't been updated, and we subsequently made updates and put the most recent version on there at their request. So yes, if there's policies, they should be up on the webpage. If they're not, and a customer points it out, we're more than happy to get it up there.
And then, are there any data sets that are available to the public?
Not at this point. What and I brought this up to my team early on in my tenure. It's just a matter of actually having a CTO on board who was able to create what my vision looked like. We would like within financial ability and bandwidth, we would like to emulate what the Houston lab has. Their outward facing website allows you by checking different radio buttons to look for certain subsets of data that you're referring to. And I believe with the changes that are coming in the new legislation, there's additional data that needs to go up. So we need to start moving towards that.
Okay, good. And is there a plan, a timeline that you think some of that shift will start happening?
Off the top of my head, no, but I can circle up with my CTO and I can definitely follow up with your office to try and put together a tentative timeframe that you can hold us to.
Okay, thank you so much. That would be great.
Yeah.
How does the department engage with various fatality review boards that fall under the chief medical examiner's office? And has the department received any feedback or recommendations from those boards that you've incorporated?
Yeah, we are involved with that. In particular, the opioid fatality review board. It had fallen off prior to my arrival. I redesignated an individual to go, and we've had folks in attendance all along. I have a very good rapport with Dr. Diaz, and if I was not meeting his requirements, I'm sure he would let me know.
Right. So, Director, I want to ask you about the independence of DFS that's received a lot of conversation of late, and to see what is your view on the benefits or drawbacks of independence of the agency and having an oversight body, not just with the board, but with the mayor.
I share the mayor and the city administrator's viewpoints on this. I think the point she made in the letter in the end of December was actually on point. And I'm not just saying that because she's my boss. I think having the agency under the chief executive gives it an additional layer of oversight and also a degree of protection from stakeholders or outside entities that might be trying to exert a greater level of influence over the lab. When you're talking independence of the laboratory, I'm not so much sure that where it resides within the government is as important as the scientific independence it needs to have. I think that is the thrust of what the forensic community has been with some difficulty striving to achieve. Case in point. So the best example would be what you want to try to avoid, especially when your scientists are doing internal analysis, is have, say, like a detective on a particular case. Maybe the detective's rushing to get closure because it's a high-profile homicide. If the detective calls over to let's say it's in biology and says, "Hey, do you have the suspect's DNA workup from that drop of blood we sent?" Without even knowing it, you've created implicit bias because now the analyst subconsciously is not just looking for a result coming from that drop of blood. They've been told, well, you're looking for the suspect's DNA profile, or it could be a latent fingerprint. Do you have the suspect's prints? So that I think is where you have to strive to get to independence, is allow the scientists to apply the best practices in technology and come up with the result and give it to the prosecutor, give it to the defense attorney, and allow them at that point to take it and use it however is appropriate for their client in litigation. The lab, yes, we contribute to the process, but we're not the litigators. We're not out there closing cases. We generate a data set that's used. We're not the police. We're not generating leads to close arrests. That's on the detectives and the patrol officers to do. We have a very important role, but within that role, we need to be independent scientifically. I'm not so much sure. It really depends on where we reside in the government, but I think just given the environment that we're in and the unique structure of our judicial system, it may have made sense for the agency to reside under the mayor, but I mean, the legislation is passed and we'll work with it accordingly.
Okay, thank you for that. No, that's helpful to get your perspective on the record. And in terms of that importance of scientific independence that you're talking about, are there new or different protocols in place under your leadership to ensure for that type of independence?
Well, yes, I mean, that's what I've been working with my general counsel to try and shore up that by hiring a former prosecutor who is used to discovery, used to the issues that are associated with prosecution, say Giglio or Brady requirements, and then also acting as the POC or conduit for both the police and the prosecutors, in which if they have a discovery request or an inquiry about the case that goes beyond just a general status update, it should be going through that POC to provide the wall, if you will, between the interested party and the scientist conducting the analysis. If the analysis is over, then that's trial prep and the two should be interfacing. But while the analysis is pending, I think you get the scientific independence by kind of walling the scientist off while the work's being done.
Okay. Are there any benefits that you can see for having the agency be independent within our district government?
I mean, yeah, there are pros and cons to being subordinate or being independent. I mean, an independent agency has a greater degree of autonomy in terms of how it hires. Independent agencies, as I understand it, based on my research into the DPM and the regulations, an independent agency comes out, say for instance, like MPD, that's semi-autonomous. You have a greater degree of HR authority in how you conduct your business. I mean, you still have to rely upon OCP and the chief financial officer for contracting and budget. So I mean, I guess it would give you some degree of flexibility, but at the end of the day, you still need to make sure that you're complying with the overarching view of the chief executive in terms of where the government is going to provide services for the residents and visitors of the district.
Okay, thank you very much, Director. So I want to give you a chance to share your testimony, and thank you for sharing it with the committee. So whenever you're ready, please go ahead. My apologies.
No worries. Well, good morning, Chairperson Pinto, and welcome. If there are any other council members, welcome as well, and thank you for the opportunity. And thank you to your staff on the Committee of Judiciary and Public Safety. As we've now discovered, I am Anthony Crispino, the Interim Director of the Department of Forensic Sciences. Thank you for inviting me to testify on behalf of the Honorable Mayor Muriel Bowser, to discuss the activities and accomplishments of the Department of Forensic Sciences in the fiscal year 2022. As we've been discussing, I'm pleased to report on the progress that DFS has made over the past year, utilizing the resources that have been provided by Mayor Bowser in her efforts to provide safer streets for district residents and visitors. I have valued this opportunity to recognize DFS efforts to engage our customers, improve our operations, maintain our quality, build towards the future, and help create a safer, stronger DC. The progress that has occurred has only been possible due to the mayor's longstanding commitment to provide the resources that the department needs, complemented by the support of the council. In addition to our state-of-the-art facility, DFS staff continue to work tirelessly to meet the needs of the district residents and restore trust with our stakeholders. Our laboratories and offices are filled with capable and dedicated scientists and staff who strive daily to deliver high quality and reliable crime scene, forensic science, and public health services and supports to critical stakeholders. I would be remiss if I didn't pause to acknowledge the incredible and consistent efforts of the staff who have led their teams forward through the necessary improvements to achieve many of our substantial accomplishments and help make the residents in the district safer. Now I will provide an overview of the accomplishments for each of our departments within DFS. In collaboration with my chief of staff, the department has hired and is currently working with the consulting firm Forensic Analysis Consulting and Training, better known as FACT, to conduct a thorough review and revamp of the agency's quality management system policies, procedures, and processes, which include guidance on conducting risk assessment, performing internal and external audits, and enhancing quality control procedures in line with regulatory guidelines. The FACT team is working directly with laboratory personnel to ensure efficiency in departmental manuals and standard operating procedures in compliance with audit recommendations that have been made and with the accrediting body standards. To date, we have successfully implemented a number of recommendations issued in the December 2021 SNA International Report, including the following highlights. We secured the services of experts in IEC 17025 accreditation requirements to conduct an independent assessment for the latent fingerprints unit. We've updated various policies and procedures surrounding evidence handling, document retention, and document management. We completed a management series offered by the George Washington University and established an online complaint form for our customers and stakeholders to utilize. We are moving steadily towards a successful application for reaccreditation of our forensic biology unit and our forensic chemistry unit while working with external partners to continue processing incoming cases. Under the leadership of the Interim Deputy Chief Science Officer, the Forensic Science Laboratory, which currently includes the Forensic Biology Unit, the Forensic Chemistry Unit, and the Latent Fingerprint Unit, the FBU has successfully outsourced 271 sexual assault kits and over 600 requests for testing, completing 84% of the cases, priority cases, in less than 60 days. The Latent Fingerprints Unit outsourced approximately 500 latent print analysis requests in that time frame. The FCU unit has shifted its emphasis from surveillance of powders and pills to increased surveillance of syringes. This greatly improved partnerships with the syringe exchange community and opened doors for continued education and information exchange with needle exchange providers on the analytical data, opioid abuse practices, and negative impacts on users. We have also established a sustainable path forward for the processing of firearm and fingerprint analysis using third-party forensic science service providers as we work towards a longer-term plan for rebuilding these capabilities. In FY22, the Forensic Intelligence Unit processed over 3,200 forensic requests for testing from stakeholders. Meanwhile, the agency continues to perform many other key functions. The Crime Scene Science Division handled 1,582 crime scene service requests to include processing 603 vehicles and attending 497 autopsies. Further, the Central Evidence Unit received 55,898 pieces of evidence for intake, storage, and maintenance. Under the purview of our Chief of Staff, our communications and forensic intelligence teams conducted outreach services that provide insight and engagement, opportunities for the public to learn more about the fields of forensic health and forensic science and public health, as well as monitoring, gathering, and providing critical intelligent data, tracking trends in criminal activity, and communicating that data to our criminal justice stakeholders to help combat violent crime in the districts. In FY22, the legal team received and handled 398 discovery requests. They also received and responded to 15 Freedom of Information Act requests, 92% of which were answered within the 15-day turnaround time. The remaining 8% had approved extensions and were answered within the extension deadlines. The legal team also oversaw the creation and approval of 12 MOAs or MOUs between the department and other agencies for goods and services. Under the leadership of the Public Health Laboratory Director, the PHL conducts testing of public health significance and extends locally important testing provided at the federal level by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The PHL provides clinical diagnostic testing, disease surveillance, emergency response support, applied research, laboratory training, and other essential services through its 5 units: the accessioning unit, the microbiology unit, the clinical chemistry unit, immunology, virology unit, and molecular diagnostic unit. In FY22, the PHL conducted a total of 79,930 tests for public health samples received, including influenza subtyping, rabies testing, Eborovirus screening, testing for foodborne outbreaks, COVID-19, and monkeypox. The PHL successfully demonstrated compliance with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, or CLIA, regulatory guidelines, as well as the CDC's Division of Select Agents and Toxins, or DSAT. under the management of our HR director, the agency was able to achieve a 15% decrease in the agency's vacancy rate with the onboarding of 32 new employees in FY22, allowing increased efficiencies in providing critical forensic and public health services. Specifically, the vacancy rate reduction has allowed the public health laboratory to expand capabilities in responding to COVID-19, monkeypox, and other novel viral outbreaks. The Crime Scene Sciences Division increased resources for responding to and collecting evidence from crime scenes, and the Forensic Science Laboratory in its efforts towards pursuit of reaccreditation to bring forensic testing and analysis services back online to help in the resolution of criminal cases impacting the district's residents and visitors. Additionally, our HR team conducted several educational outreach programs to create the next generation of public service scientists via various internal and external internship programs, including the district leadership program that promotes employment opportunities, building pathways to the middle class. DFS proudly partners with Howard University to provide support and training for students during their microbiology rotation, and some of whom have been hired by DFS post-graduation. DFS recently received an award from the Department of Disability Services for hosting an internship for aspiring young professionals in the crime scene sciences and information technology units. This program also resulted in the recruitment of one of the program participants. In FY22, our information technology team was instrumental in ensuring the continuity of services, system improvements, and optimization for the professional and scientific functions within DFS. Under the direction of our new Chief Information Officer, I keep calling him CTO, but CIO, our IT team worked diligently on customizations and upgrades to various agency systems, such as the Laboratory Information Management System, or LIMS, which is the central repository for tracking of criminal casework and evidence received and processed by the agency. Through hiring and working closely with our vendor, SNA International, the IT team has been steadfast in reaching established goals for the LIMS project. Further, under the management of my Chief Operating Officer, the team performs several critical functions, including budget management, contracts, and procurement, and ensuring the health and safety of all staff. In FY22, our team processed 229 procurement requisitions and 356 purchase card transactions while ensuring we met the district's DSLBD compliance requirements. In collaboration with the Department of General Services, the operations team coordinates all facility maintenance tasks and projects. Our health and safety team provided oversight, guidance, and training to ensure the agency remains compliant with OSHA and all building-related regulations. I couldn't be prouder of the work that DFS has done under my leadership. I am confident that DFS will deliver even greater returns for the residents and visitors of the District of Columbia. I would like to acknowledge Mayor Bowser, City Administrator Donahue, and the new Deputy Mayor Apia and their staff for the continuous and generous support of DFS as we strive to achieve the Mayor's vision of a stronger, safer, stronger DC. I would also like to recognize our public safety partners who support DFS. I am thankful for the DFS team who work within the offices and laboratories of DFS, whose stronger science has led to safer streets for all of our friends and neighbors in the District of Columbia. And in closing, I would like to thank you for your leadership and support as we move through this process. We appreciate the opportunity to share achievements, and this concludes my testimony. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to field them at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Director Crispino, and for your flexibility. But thank you for being here with us today. I look forward to continuing to work with you in the coming months and year on seeking reaccreditation and following up on much of what we discussed today. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. I look forward to building this relationship and moving the ball forward with the agency.
Thank you, sir. There being no further business before the committee today, the time is now 11:38 a.m. We are adjourned.
Take care.